Welcome to the Techquanimity podcast, where we have interesting conversations at the intersection between technology, mindfulness, and compassion. And I'm Dr. Cynthia Phelps, and the name of my company is Inner Ally, where we're focused on how to create an inner compassionate voice that really helps you to thrive in life. And I'm here with my partner, Mark.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mark, and I'm a co-founder at Mindful Text. We help create mindfulness programs through text message, and I'm very happy to have our guest today, Scott Shute. A little bit about him. He's at the intersection of the workplace and ancient wisdom traditions. He blends his experience as a Silicon Valley executive with his lifelong practice and passion as a wisdom seeker and teacher. In his most recent role at LinkedIn, Scott was the head of mindfulness and compassion programs. He's been a pioneer in creating workplace mindfulness programs and advancing the discussion around compassion in a work context. His latest venture, Changing Work, seeks to curate the best practices of conscious business and make them more widely available. He's also the author of the award-winning book, The Full Body Yes. I actually have a copy here. So let's invite Scott up to the stage here.
Hey,
Scott.
friends. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining.
Welcome.
So our first question for you, I know you talk a little bit about how you got into mindfulness and compassion
Sure.
in your book, but could you tell us a little bit about how you got into bringing wisdom practices into the workplace?
Yeah, good question. It's kind of a lifelong venture. So I've had a practice since I was 13. I've been teaching meditation classes, things like that, since I was in college. But it was something I never talked about at work. It was like a closeted part of my world until I got to LinkedIn in my mid 40s. I was a VP of global customer operations. And our CEO was talking about using his own practice using Headspace. I think maybe he was an early investor as well. And so he was openly talking about meditation. I thought, well, wow, maybe this is a place where I can bring, some of my passion, some of my skills to the workplace in kind of a secular way. And so over time, I got brave enough to lead my first session. I had talked to my friend who runs wellness at LinkedIn, and we both got excited about it. And I went back to my desk and I was excited, and I did nothing about it for 3 or 4 months. I was terrified because, when I grew up, my meditation practice, my spiritual practice was not the same as my parents. And they thought that I had joined a cult, or they thought that I had done something strange. And I'd learned to kind of close off that part of my life. Anyway, I finally got up the courage to lead one session. In that first time, there was only one person there. I'm sure that guy was just as afraid as I was. I never saw him again. But then it became a thing, a regular thing. The next week there were 3, then there were 5. And then over time, over a long time, people knew that I did it. So I got it invited. So as an example, the CFO would hold a big finance meeting with 300 or 400 people, invite me to kick it off with a meditation, 8 or 10-minute meditation. The chief marketing officer would hold an offsite and do breakout groups where you're doing some activity. Like it could have been square dancing or whiskey tasting or meditation. So some people would come to my meditation. And myself and a bunch of other volunteers essentially created a mindfulness program at LinkedIn. And then for me, the tipping point was our CEO gave the commencement address at Wharton, maybe 2018 or 19. And he talked about compassion. Now, that was pretty brave too, because Wharton's pretty buttoned down place. And, that was a big move. And the next day he's on Good Morning America. And this is all they want to talk about is, one question about LinkedIn and 22 questions about compassion in the workplace. And I thought, okay, it's time. It's time for me. I'd been in my operations role for 6 years. It's time for me to do something new. But it was time for us as LinkedIn to put our money where our mouth was. Because while we were talking, he was talking out in the world about compassion. We hadn't done anything formally. So I made a pitch to our CEO that I'm the operations guy. I can help operationalize compassion. I can help mainstream mindfulness. And in that moment, it was hard to say no to. So together we created the role, and I did that for 3 years. It was pretty amazing.
So I love that the phrase operationalizing compassion, mindfulness. Tell me a little bit more about how you see that. Like, what's the definition that you
Sure.
have?
I do split the two because I think they're very different activities. And mindfulness, I think, is easier to get at programmatically. So, as an example, we gave my goal was to mainstream mindfulness, to make it just as normal as physical exercise, this mental exercise. So we gave everybody access to an app. We started with Headspace and moved to Wise at Work, which I really like from our friends at Wisdom Labs. It's for people who are working. It's super relevant. We would hold, monthly gatherings. We probably had 50 or 60 weekly meditations that were going on at any one time, across the globe at LinkedIn. Every quarter, I would lead a Friday afternoon or Saturday morning mini retreat and introduce 6 or 8 different types of practices so people could find what they like and what resonated with them. And every year we'd have a mindfulness challenge where we would using the app, we would encourage people to use it, and we'd gamify it. If they used it 20 times within the month, they'd get a free t-shirt. Or one year we did hoodies. And I would say never underestimate the power of a free hoodie on human behavior, because we had over 2,000 people sign up and use the app. And so just making it normal, right? Here was a VP and other leaders talking about meditation, just made it normal, just made it part of the fabric. So mindfulness, I think, is super powerful, and the science bears this out. Helps us sleep better, helps us reduce stress, reduce anxiety, makes us better leaders, better relationships, blah, blah, blah. It makes us so much better at what we do. And probably it often in a company gets relegated to the wellness world, because just like the gym, we know it's good for us, but not everybody uses the gym. We can't make people use the gym. So as a company, we offer all these things, and it's, like a buffet of things that any employee can use. And we can encourage them and we can shine a light on them. And that's good. Compassion, however, while mindfulness is what goes on individually between our ears, kind of mostly when we close our eyes, compassion is how we do everything, because we don't work by ourselves. We don't work or live in isolation. So compassion is embedded, can be embedded in how we build products, how we sell those products, how we service those products, how we treat each other, the policies that we put in place for our employees, the policies we put in place for our customers. Literally everything we do as a company can have compassion embedded in its roots. And for me, that's what I'm really, really, really interested in, is not just the talk or not just the individual development, which I think is critical, but it's that external, okay, how do we actually show up? What do we do when we get back to our desk? What do we do when we go to a meeting? That's what I'm interested in.
That's fascinating. It's interesting that mindfulness seems to be, highly operationalized, something that is you can opt into, that you can use like a tool like the gym. But then compassion is really like, who are we as a
Right.
company, right?
That's right. That's right.
Fascinating.
That's right. And it goes to everything that we do. And obviously it's so much better. So I'm working with companies now trying to help them, implement these things. It works so much better when the most senior leader is on stage or on Zoom talking about it. They don't even have to use the words compassion, but it's the idea that we're in it together. I talk about building a conscious business, right? Oh, what is that? What's a conscious business? And to me, it's this movement away from the me to the we, right? For me, a conscious business is one that is solving for the whole, not just the shareholders, right? Oftentimes we think, oh, well, the purpose of business is to make money. The only purpose of business is to make money. Like, well, I don't know about that. That's not what I believe. But the research shows, like Raj Sisodia and the team that wrote Firms of Endearment and later Conscious Capitalism, showed that companies who on purpose take care of all of their stakeholders and create a balance of needs among all of their stakeholders, they actually make more money. So the idea that we can solve for the whole while even doing better for our shareholders is really powerful. So what does that mean? It means creating a great environment for our employees where they can do their best work, where they feel safe, where they're developed, creating great value for our customers so that they continue to, stay in relationship with us. And when we do those things, it helps create great value for our shareholders. And then we've essentially moved from the just thinking about the me and my needs to the overall we and the collective's needs. And we all win when we do that.
Thanks for sharing that, Scott. Can you share some of the most effective team exercises that you're doing with folks? You mentioned,
Sure.
you're training organizations and teams and perhaps individuals. I'm curious. Well, one is what's effective, and
Yeah.
I'm curious also if maybe the most effective practices are perhaps the most popular as well. I'm curious how you're thinking
Interesting.
about that.
I find that most of the answers to life generally, and business too, and success and leaders and teams, most of the answers are pretty simple to understand. They're often really hard to put into practice, but they're super simple to understand. And the thing with teams is no different. So at the root of what makes a great team, many people know Google did this Project Aristotle. No, I'm saying it wrong. Anyway, is it Project Aristotle? Project Aristotle, where
believe
they
so.
looked at the factors of a high performing team, and I'm not sure what they were looking for or what they thought that they would receive back. But the answer was the single biggest factor is psychological safety. In other words, do I feel safe around my team? Do I feel like I can, be creative? I can share that idea that pushes the boundaries. Can I win in front of them? I think that's actually the hardest one, right? You imagine a sales team, and what if I'm already at 230% of quota and my teammates are at 70% of quota, or the reverse? Are we the ones who are behind? Are we really going to help the ones who are ahead? So all of these things to say, this is what we're aiming for, is psychological safety. There's a couple practices I really like. In the world of Zoom, I think we've all kind of gotten accustomed to the opening question. And some leaders and some people are better at this than others. But the idea of this opening question is to get us to drop our walls, right? Often we come to a meeting and we have these walls up. We're looking for our own personal safety. But when we can drop those walls down, that means we have a psychological safety among each other. Like we can be ourselves in front of each other. So this opening question is a good one. One of the practices I like with teams I work with is what we call the 7-minute stories. And I got this from my friend Kevin Delaney. But essentially, the first time you meet somebody you're going to work with pretty often, you set up a half-hour meeting like you would normally do to get to know each other. And in the first 15 minutes, you essentially swap the 7-minute stories of your life. There's no other prompt other than just share the story of your life in 7 minutes. Now, the idea is like you're sharing whatever you want to share, but oftentimes people go deeper than just their resume. They go deeper than just their work experience. They talk about what's important to them. They talk about whatever, their kids or their dogs or their dream to be a singer or whatever it was. And this simple activity, which is different than just tell me a little bit about yourself, because we tend to stay on a surface level. But if you're going to be there for 7 minutes, you're going to be held in attention by the other person, we tend to go deeper. And it's things like this that are honestly super easy to put into place that help us get to know each other. There's another one which I think is really easy and easy to implement even. I call it the Working With Me guide. And we have a template. It's 2 or 3 pages of some pretty key questions about things I want you to know about me. It's like the user's manual of how to work with me, right? So as an example, some of mine are: do what you say you're going to do. If you tell me you're going to do something and don't do it, that is for sure how to upset me. Or like, I don't like to be surprised, or here's the things I do like. And, I find this to be incredibly powerful, not only for the people writing it, because you really clarify, well, how do people work with me? How do I want to be worked with? But then to be able to share that pretty openly with other people is incredibly useful and powerful.
I think that's important too, as we're beginning to really recognize the diversity that is among us, not just nationalities or races, but neurodiversity, and like those types of tools can be so welcoming to people who are maybe don't function in a way that is considered like the most typical, right?
That's right. And this is a vehicle which allows that to be surfaced in a really natural way where they're not like put on the spot like, hey, let me tell you about this thing that's different about me. It's just
Right.
expected. We're all going to say the things about us. Right? So it's a nice leveler.
And Scott, you've been doing these programs for a few years now, and I'm curious in your journey, let's say operationalizing mindfulness compassion, are there things that you've doubled down on or perhaps taken off of your list of um, processes that have evolved over time as you've been learning
Hmm.
operationalizing these great practices?
Good question. For me, it's about simplification, right? I, here we are. We're building content, the three of us, right? And there's so much content in the world. In fact, there's literally an endless amount of content. Like we could spend the rest of our lives reading and not even make a dent in the knowledge that's in the world. And so creating new content is perhaps less important to me than making the content we have easier to consume, right? So really to curate. And these practices, instead of saying, well, here's 100 things you could do, I often come down to like, let's just do two things. Do these two simple practices as a leader, as a team, as a group, and life will be better, right? So oftentimes we think, oh, well, operationalizing compassion, changing work from the inside out, this is a big idea, right? This means, oh, wow, we're going to change work for 3.3 billion people in the workforce. Oh my God, that's a mountain to climb. And I think this is how I used to think. And now I think, no, 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 no. Let's just take one step together. Just one step that we can all take that's easy, that's not a big deal. And when we start taking those one steps, we can push a little further, we can go a little further. Because at the end of the day, I'm an operations leader, right? Um, and a big idea guy. So I'm trying to put the two together and just make it simple.
Love
Well,
that.
I'm excited to hear a little bit more about your latest venture, which is the Changing Work Collective. Do you want to talk a little bit about what inspired you to create that and really what that's all about?
Sure. Well, I go back to my mission. My vision is to change work from the inside out. And when I first we were trying to do that at LinkedIn. Then I left. I was on my own, and pretty quickly realized, like, oh, this is never going to happen just by myself, right? This is a team sport. This is something we need to all get engaged in. And so I thought, well, let's pull together all the people, as many people as we can that are trying to do this work. So we're starting from this place of finding other people like me, um, who are coaches or trainers or podcasters or authors or solopreneurs, basically practitioners who are doing the work of conscious business and then trying to influence these companies and organizations for those practices to take hold. So we started just by pulling this group together. And our value proposition, we talk about cake because, again, trying to keep it simple. It's an acronym. The C is for community. So it's a place where we can all get together because sometimes this is lonely work or sometimes you just want to bounce an idea off of each other. So this is a place where there's less noise and more substance. So you can come in and, meet with other people of like hearts, like minds. The A is around amplification. How do we help each other amplify the collective message of conscious business and even the individual messages of the businesses that we're all trying to promote? Because everybody's trying to get their word out there, to get their business out there, their idea out there, and it feels like it's just more powerful when we do it together. And then the K in cake is for knowledge. We all have to solve the same problems. When I left LinkedIn, when anybody starts their new job, we all have to solve the same problems. How do I brand myself? How do I build a website? How do I do whatever marketing I'm going to do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're trying to pull together, again, this word curate curate the best practices of running a small business so that we can all be more successful. And then the E in cake is effervescence. My friend Dacher Keltner from UC Berkeley wrote the book on awe. And one of the pathways to awe is collective effervescence. And it's this idea that when you have a bunch of people who are all together, headed in the same direction, a kind of magic happens. A kind of magic happens that you can't contain or even, force. And so we're seeing this in the collective of people starting new businesses together or starting new friendships or just bouncing ideas off of each other. So this first phase is about how do we get the practitioners together and help them be more successful? And then the second phase is how do we curate the best practices from that collective and make them available to businesses, so that we can put them to use at a larger scale.
Along the same line of that kind of thinking, once we theoretically hit this scale, I'm curious how you envision mindfulness and compassion evolving in the corporate world or the working world over the next, let's say, 1 to 5 years.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's as consciousness will evolve, and that's unknowable of how it will evolve, right? Will each of us, I talk about personally, changing work from the inside out. And I mean that in this way. So one of my favorite quotes is from Rumi and Hafiz, my two favorite, Persian poets from 600 or 700 years ago. But Rumi said lots of things. One of my favorite things that he said is, yesterday I was clever and I tried to change the world. But today I'm wise and I'm working on changing myself. And I feel torn between this wisdom and what I'm trying to do. Because on the one hand, I'm trying to change the world. I'm trying to change work from the inside out. I'm fascinated by what mindfulness and compassion will look like in 5 years or 10 years and 25. And I want it to look a certain way. And I know that the most important thing in my own life is my own development, just as it is in your own lives. The most important job each one of us has to do is our own development, our own level of consciousness. So here's the thing. All I can do is raise my own consciousness and try to be a light in the world and hope that that light catches, fire with other people and and helps them light their own light. But we can't control it, right? We can't control it. So that's for me, the most important thing. To answer your question, what I think it will look like. Well, here's the trends over the last few years. If I look back at the last 15 years of, let's say, mindfulness programs in the workplace, we started with Google and Chengming Tan and that work. And, what has happened is programs have come and gone, and they usually go with individuals. Leaders come and go. And more companies know that they want to do something, but they're looking for, honestly, most of them are looking for the tick in the box of something that they can offer to say that they offer it. So most people will offer an app like a Headspace or a Calm or, a whatever, and they'll tick the box and say, we're good. And I think, that's okay, but it's kind of a shame, because what happens with a lot of corporate benefits is that people don't even know that they have access to it, right? If that's all we do, then that's not really enough to really move the needle. So if it's something that's important to us, then we put some juice behind it. We have a leader assigned to it. We have some programming assigned to it beyond just the tick in the box. That's mindfulness. And I think that what we're seeing is a broadening, but a shallowing of the offerings that are out there, right? There's more out there, but they tend to be not as deep as some of the original programming that we saw. On the compassion side, I think this is 100% tied to our level of consciousness as a people, right? Will leaders, individual leaders at companies, the most senior leaders, be more focused on profits or more focused on the balance of profits and people? And this is unknowable. This is unknowable. It will follow how we grow in consciousness as individuals. So for me, and I hope for the people doing this work, like, it starts with us. It starts with our own work, and then helping to share that work in ways that are simple and ways that are easy to operate.
It reminds me of kind of my own trajectory of, maybe becoming more conscious. I don't know if that's even, I don't know if I can even claim that, but, it's not like this, straight trajectory up, right? And so, looking in corporate, as kind of we've moved forward with things like diversity and inclusion, right? It's like that path forward has been like, woo, and I feel like maybe that's what we should, be looking for, that it's probably not going to be a straight path,
That's right.
because it's really, there's so many like world considerations that, when money gets tight, people like,
That's
they
right.
start to protect themselves and change the model. And then when things are better, it seems like people open and are, more interested in collaboration. And
That's
so,
right.
yeah,
This is our survival instinct. We evolved
yeah.
this way, right? Over hundreds of thousands of years, we evolved in a resource scarce environment. So I'm watching this show on Netflix called Chimp Empire. I'm only 2 episodes into it, but it's fascinating. I always love these nature shows, but this one is really extraordinary because these chimps, they look and act scarily like us, right? They each have individual personalities. There's always power dynamics at play, there's social dynamics at play, but they operate in a resource scarce environment. And so what that means is if a chimp, like a lone chimp or a group of chimps come into their territory, they will kill them. Like there's no discussion, there's no negotiation. There's, hey, no, come on over, there's plenty of figs for everybody. It's like, no, they kill them. They don't ask any questions. So this is how we evolved. We evolved by our first instinct, our first reaction to everything from traffic to our job to our relationships to food to everything comes from our animal instincts of survival. Okay, so going back to conscious business, when times are good, we're like, oh, we feel more comfortable. We feel physically and psychological and financially safe. So we feel like, okay, well, there's more to share. So yeah, we can talk about the us. But when we as individuals or the company as a group feels that financial pressure, then we go into survival mode, right? We lose our creativity. We just go into hunker down mode and we like, okay, what's the core? We need to make money. How do we make money? Now, what I would say is, even in that environment, the best way to make money is to do some of these things, is to focus on employees and to focus on customers and to have a good business model. But that's not what happens because that is really hard to do.
It kind of goes against what your body feels, right? Because
Yeah,
those core fears that you're talking about, right, are
that's right.
at play. And you can look at the research article and it'll tell you, oh, Compassionomics says that if you implement compassion in the workplace, you're going to have better financial outcomes. But
Right.
it's hard to override those real feelings that you have of fear in your body.
It's super hard. So that's why it goes back to our individual development.
Mm.
Right. So if you're one of us, if you're a practitioner coming from the outside and you just spent the weekend at this great retreat and you feel like the world is open and your heart is open, and then you go into business and you try to bring that exact same energy and those exact same solution set to a world that feels constrained and fearful and just trying to get by, it doesn't work.
Mm.
And so for us, it's doing the work ourselves and meeting people where they are, building bridges to
Mm.
where the company is speaking their language, using tools and techniques and practices that will work regardless of what's happening, that will work even in the face of fear.
Mm. That reminds me of another question we wanted to ask you, which is about, which is a fear-based question. What are some of the kind of the things that people are scared of, or some of the misconceptions when it comes to mindfulness and compassion?
Uh, yeah, it's so funny. Um, so I get kind of everything. It's like at the individual level, people are like, oh, I'm going to lose my edge. Like if I just get really chill, then this is probably going to mean I'm not going to be as good a performer because I've always lived with this chip on my shoulder or this, you know, drive and wah 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 wah. So I'm going to lose my edge if I do mindfulness, which is, then we have a whole different set of questions about like, what do you really want?
Right. What are we going for here?
Right. At an individual level, it's like, would you rather be successful and miserable or successful and happy? It's like, oh.
I think that question actually scales to the corporation.
Exactly. Exactly. And so we lose sight sometimes as individuals. So to answer your question, this is what some individuals fear. There's this other thing which I've never seen in practice, but the fear is like, oh, companies just offer mindfulness programs so that they can keep people quiet and still treat them poorly. Right. And to me, this is such a cynical view. Like, we at LinkedIn, we offered mindfulness practices because we want people to be their best selves. Right. And of course, everything a company does is also in its own best interests. Right. At a company level, if people are their best, it's going to be good for the company. That's not a cynical view. It's just like, this is how we'll win together. Like, we'll be together. But the cynic's view is like, oh, they just offer these things so that they can get their employees to work harder and not notice. Like, okay, I just don't agree with that at all. But it's funny sometimes that I hear it.
We've talked a lot about the benefits of mindfulness, compassion, and I'm thinking just to balance these things out, I'm curious if you've heard of any or seen any negative impacts of these practices. There's a lot of discussion around trauma-informed mindfulness and how that can there can be a negative impact for people practicing meditation in that way and mindfulness. But I still struggle to find very many negative outcomes outside of some of these fringe scientific articles
Yeah.
that say it decreases your ability to feel, for example. But I'm curious in practice if you've seen anything or experienced anything.
No, I mean, there are anything used too much can be a negative, right? Right. So if you put up, and we're giving way too much airspace to the stuff that could go wrong, because I think it's just, again, a fear thing. But like, if you put up a mindfulness room and somebody spends all day in there, they spend 12 hours a day, of course, that's not what it's intended for. Right. Or if you institute a compassion practice about whatever it is, but it makes people not want to say the hard thing in the room. Right. This is also not a true practice, but it's the fear. Like, so as an example, at LinkedIn, we were in some pockets, a very consensus driven organization, right? Because you wanted to respect each other. And so sometimes it took too long to get to a decision, or people would hide behind not saying the hard things because they didn't want to hurt somebody else's feelings. They wanted to be compassionate. Like, oh, this person's having a performance issue, but I can't tell them because I want to be compassionate. Now, the truth is that's just a misunderstanding of what compassion really is. But this is sometimes what happens when we're trying to implement some of these programs. There will be a misunderstanding of the truth, right? Because the truth is there's nothing you can't say if it comes from a good place, right? In the same way that, like radical candor, I think it was Susan Scott's world, that became popular for a while. But also, when overused, it became licensed for some people to be a jackass. It's like, I'm just going to say whatever I want because it's radical candor. It's like, no, that's not what this was intended to be. So like every other thing, if we use something too much, it can be a detriment. But when used properly, I don't see any downside, to the things that we're talking about.
Jumping to another topic and thought here, I've heard of these practices within mindfulness and compassion being applied differently across different types of cultures and people. I'm curious how you think about that and perhaps any learnings that may come up from bringing these practices to different types of groups of teams or people or cultures.
I think that's a really important point, because every company is different, and every company is different because they're made up of individuals, and those individuals are all in different places. They come from different cultural contexts, they're different locations, different levels of consciousness. So as a practitioner, or for any of us that are practitioners going into a company, man, we can't just come with the same thing every time. We have to really understand what is happening inside of that organization, what the needs are, what are the problems they're trying to solve. Um, and sometimes the things we do are generic enough that it will fit no matter what. And sometimes they really need to be fine-tuned. Whether it's the marketing of what we're going to be doing or the process of what we're going to be doing or how it fits into their operations. So I think this is really important for all of us as leaders, is to realize like every group is different and requires a little bit, requires the thought to make sure that what we're about to implement fits.
Can
Do
you
you
share a
agree?
specific example? Sorry, Cynthia, one last question. Can you share a specific example of maybe what you did differently with one organization versus a different organization?
Sure. So even in something as relatively simple as, like, let's say leading a meditation, which is maybe not the best example, but it shows how things are different. In some cases, I could quote go all the way. I could do a 20-minute guided practice. We could do visualization. We could do whatever. In some groups, that would just not fly. And so instead, I would talk about it more. It would be more of an intellectual exercise. And maybe I would do a breathing exercise for 90 seconds or 2 minutes with their eyes open, right? And then we talk about it again. And then maybe we do another breathing exercise or something. And so just fine tuning based on, what's comfortable for them and feels natural.
I was wondering if you have put together or utilize any kind of needs assessment when you go into a company. Tell me a little bit about like how you have gone through that process.
So what I don't have is I don't have my own assessment. But what I typically do, and kind of going back to meeting people where they are, is I find that most companies already have some sort of employee survey or external assessment using Glint or some of these other tools that are out there, or even 360 tools, right? Like I could build my own 360 tool, but there are so many that already exist. Like let's not recreate the wheel for everything. So I often start with okay, what do you already have, right? Because most mature companies already have something. If they don't, then it's a series of interviews and it's just coaching questions to get to the same place. But if they do, we're starting with a place of, okay, show me your 360, show me your employee survey scores. What are you trying to do next, right? What have you done with your evaluation? Now, sometimes I will ask the coaching questions to dig in if there's spaces that I see that haven't really been poked at or determined. But I think this is a nice way of meeting them where they are. What have they already evaluated? Where do they want to go? And then we kind of fill in the gaps a little bit.
That makes a lot of sense. So, there's several of our viewers who are founders of companies and leaders in that respect. And so, if you were to give them some advice about how to utilize these tools in their leadership, what would be some advice that you would give founders?
Start early, right? So on a couple things. One is just the way you talk about the future, right? Is it balanced? So as an example, I've definitely seen leaders who only focused on the financial part of where they were headed. We're going to be the next one to get funding. We're going to be the next unicorn. We're going to be the next $1 billion revenue. We're going to be the next $10 billion revenue. And the truth is, it's exciting in the short term to work for a winning team, to be on a winning team. That's exciting, but it's not sustainable, right? People don't stay for that. They stay for meaning, right? So early on, talk about and measure all of the impact you're going to have, right? So instead of just saying we're the next ones to get funding, instead say, oh, we helped 75,000 customers last quarter do this to make the change to go from A to B, right? Here's how we're making a difference in the world. And here's the environment we created for our employees. As we grew, we were able to add these benefits and create this space. And, we're also going to be the next unicorn, right? So creating a balance of, are you really solving for the whole, and giving people a reason to come to work that's more than just financial. That's where it starts. The second part is measuring those things. So as you have your scorecard, your company scorecard, your team scorecard, don't make it only about the results. Of course, those are critical. This is how we stay in business. But also include, depending on the level of leader you are, as it's appropriate, also include, the customers that we're serving and metrics around employees, around engagement or retention or whatever it is. But create a balance. And from there, lots of goodness will happen. Lots of goodness will happen.
It's so fascinating that your answer is, a very high level answer. When you come to the table with all these tools, kind of, base level tools, that is the core advice.
Yeah.
I'm also really interested, I have a company that works in this space, and so does Mark. What advice would you give to folks like us who want to break into the space and work with corporations, bring our wisdom?
All the same things. It's none of it is different. So it starts with us. So for each one of us, so I have, just like the two of you, I have my own company too. So it starts with us and doing our own work, right? We got into this work for hopefully a pure reason. And if we get overly focused, look, I have found myself in the same spot. If I get myself in a spot where I'm only thinking about finances, then the energy that I bring to the work is only about finances, right? So I have to always remember it starts with me. Like, why am I doing this work? What is the purpose? What is the reason behind it? Because that's the energy that is different. The companies get approached every day by people wanting to sell them something, right? I get approached every day by, vendors wanting to sell me something. But it's that heart connection from us that is different. It's that value add. And if we're trying to sell or promote something that is making a difference in employees' lives from the perspective of consciousness or the perspective of compassion or the perspective of making the workplace having a better culture, if we don't embody that, then what chance do they have? Right? So we have to embody it first. So from that center point, goodness happens, but it has to start there.
Shifting gears a little bit to this topic of technology and perhaps AI, I'm curious how you see the role of technology evolving in supporting these practices. And maybe it doesn't include AI, but talking a little bit about AI would be interesting from your perspective.
Sure. I think AI is fascinating. I've been a techie since I was a kid. I grew up on a farm in Kansas. Still, I was a techie. Migrated to Silicon Valley kind of as soon as I could, and so it's been something that has been a big part of my life. And I'll admit, I have fear. I have fear about AI. I don't know if it's just my primal brain working, but kind of where I've gotten to is I think that AI, if we bucket AI as the next big thing, right? And that all things will be AI will be used as consciousness is. So in other words, does it have the power for good? Of course it does. Does it have the power for bad? Of course it does. And so for me, it goes back to consciousness. The most important thing by far each of us can do is develop ourselves, because then we will use it in the way, that fits our development. So to answer your question, this is one of my big questions is, can AI make us more conscious? Can AI make us more loving? Okay, so if we break down what is consciousness, what is compassion? It starts with our own awareness, our awareness of self. All right, well, we already have wearables that give us more information about ourselves, right? Our heart rate, our breathing rates, things like that. imagine a world, what if AI could tell us more about ourselves? It's like, oh, hey, Scott, I reviewed your last Zoom call and here's some pointers, right? It looked like you were really expressing anger or you're really expressing, joy or love. It's like, just as a reflection to see like, oh, I didn't know that. So could it teach me about my patterns? Could it be a teacher, that wise kind of spiritual teacher who's kind of always there to say, well, actually, you may want to try this, or you may want to consider this, or here's an inspiring poem by Hafiz or Rumi that would, lead you one click further down the path from the thing that you expressed. I think that would be amazing. So first, it starts with our own self-awareness, our own development, and then compassion. So if I call that mindfulness, our own awareness, but then compassion is awareness of others, is how that starts. So I define compassion as our capacity for three things. It's awareness of others, a mindset of kindness or wishing the best for them, and then the courage to take action. So you imagine kind of the same technology, whether it's a wearable or whether it's on a Zoom call. Imagine if I had a real-time feed with someone that I'm interacting with. It's like, oh, you lost her, right? Cynthia's not listening to you anymore. Or that thing you said, like, she seems to be upset about it. It's like, oh, I didn't realize that. And maybe it gives me a chance to repair. Like, maybe try this. So if it could be our companion that helps us be more aware and present and loving and kind to each other, then I think that could be amazing.
That's a great answer. And in fact, we know that it's going that direction in some cases. I'm looking forward to perhaps interviewing an academic who has developed AI that works in conjunction with the like suicide text lines, where instead of just texting directly back to the person, it goes through the AI, and the AI is like, hey, would you like to rephrase it this way? And then you can kind of choose, how you want to
Yeah.
respond. So, like, that's already, I think, a great example of a compassionate use of AI. And so, I do have high hopes that it can be incorporated in a way that's mindful and compassionate. And with the work that I do, my focus is really on people's inner voice and if their self-talk is helpful or unhelpful. And
Mm,
so I'm actually working with some AI to see if it can replicate some of the coaching I do with people
mm.
one-on-one to work with them on the specific kind of maladaptive thought processes that they have and how they can change those for themselves to thrive. And so it's going to be an interesting ride.
Oh, for sure. For sure. It's going to be fascinating.
Well, Scott, is there anything else that you would like to talk about today?
Oh, that is a broad question. I'm hopeful for the Giants this year.
No guarantees there either.
No, I'm kidding. I probably spend way too much of my free time thinking about the San Francisco Giants. Um, actually, so I'll share a story though, now that we're talking about it, and I'll call this, here's what I learned about compassion from the San Francisco Giants. So I like baseball. As a kid, baseball was my thing. But as an adult, what I realized is like, I don't really like watching baseball. If you find two teams that aren't the Giants, I don't really care. But I watch, there's 162 games a year. I'll probably catch part of 100 games for the San Francisco Giants. Like I spend a lot of time thinking about it. I'll watch the games. I'm really into it. But other teams, I don't care. Now, at the root of this is what we face when we have compassion, right? So Dr. Eagleman at Stanford, he's a researcher. He did this study where he put people in an MRI machine, and he and the team are watching their brains, right? And the people in an MRI machine are watching this little screen. And in the little screen, in the control environment, they see a human hand, like a human hand like that. And out of the corner of the screen, this giant needle comes and punctures the meaty part of the hand. And our brain lights up, right? Our brain lights up in the pain centers as if it were happening to us. We don't have the same physical pain, but the same kind of emotional, mental response. That's the control environment. In another environment, so in the B part of the test, he adds something. So he uses different, let's say, skin tones, colors, genders of hands, and he put labels on the hands: Jewish, Muslim, Christian, atheist, Scientologist. Same thing. Needle comes and punctures the hand. Now, if that person is in my in-group, my brain lights up. If the person is not in my in-group, boo, flat line. So think about this for a second, right? We go back to the chimp empire I'm talking about. When we have people in our own tribe, in our own group, whatever that is, we protect them, we feel compassion about them. If it's Giants baseball, I'm interested. But if they're not in our tribe, if it's the Dodgers, the dreaded Dodgers, or even a neutral team, like whatever, the Cubs, I don't care, right? At worst, it's the Dodgers. I care, but in a bad way. The Cubs, I don't care. And this is what we're seeing in the whole world, right? We're seeing isolationism. We're seeing tribalism. We're seeing as fear increases, we get smaller and smaller and smaller and retreat into our own world. Now, the opposite of this is another show I'm watching, or I have watched, called Drive to Survive. Some people may have seen this, about F1, Formula One racing. Before watching the show, I cared zero cares about Formula One. I couldn't name a single driver. I didn't even know what it was about. But after 2 or 3 seasons of learning their stories and getting to know people, all of a sudden I'm considering like going to a Formula One race in, somewhere in the world. Now, what happened? Well, I became aware. I got curious. I learned about the other tribe, right? I learned about this other world. And I think this is really instructive for all of us, right? How, if there's a group in the world that we feel anti, it could be political, it could be cultural, it could be whatever, but you feel like, oh, I am against them for some reason. I'm opposed to them for some reason. The truth is, they're just like us. We just don't know them, right? So if we were those apes and you placed us in the other group of apes, eventually we'd assimilate. We're just like them. We'd learn to be just like them. We would act just like them. In the same way, if we were placed in those other cultures or on that other baseball team or wherever we were, we would be just like them. So if we think about what's the number one skill to build compassion, to live in a world that has peace, I think it starts with curiosity.
Mm.
I think it starts with curiosity. Why? The more I know about them, the more I realize they're just like me. And then I can have not judgment, but I can have recognition. I can recognize that they are just like me. And I can let go of all my judgment.
Mm.
And when I let go of all my judgment, I myself become free as well. So these are some things I've been thinking about. Thank you that was a very long answer, but thank you for the opportunity to share that.
I think that is the core problem that the world is facing, and the ability of awareness of the problem, and then transformation of the fear into curiosity about the other. Right? That's beautiful. That's such a great path.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Mark, did you have any other questions that you wanted to ask?
No, that was a great story. They say that stories are what stick, and I'm certainly going to have that top of mind as I think about myself in this world with other groups and how I build relationships with people outside of my own comfort zone. So thank you for sharing that, Scott.
My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, we've really enjoyed having you on. Thank you so much for joining us on the Techquanimity podcast.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So where can folks see what you're doing, connect with you? And I
Sure.
know you wanted to share an offer for the Changing Work Collective. So yeah, please share.
Sure. Sure. Find us. You can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out. You can also email me. I'm at scott@changingwork.org. And come see what we're up to at changingwork.org. Both if you're a practitioner and you want to join our community, or if you're a leader and maybe you'd like me to tell some stories at your next Global Leadership Summit or offsite or sales conference, check us out at changingwork.org. And and the offer, if you want to join our community, let's see, I have to think about what my code is. You can use the code ONEFREE to get an extra free month of access to our premium membership.
Wonderful. Thank you for that offer, Scott. And thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your wisdom. And I love the vision that you have for changing work in the future.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Well, one thing that I think we should mention is that both Mark and I are members of the Changing Work Collective, because we don't just like to talk about it. We actually are participating in a way. And so it was really fun to have Scott here today to talk about what he's doing in the world of changing the face of corporate work in the world. And that last story is just so powerful, the way that it speaks to what we need to be thinking about as individuals to be able to influence change on a global perspective.
Yeah, I really liked personally in our conversation some of the specific examples that can be done bringing these tools and practices into the workplace. So I really appreciated those as well.
All right. Well, do you have anything interesting going on this week in your world of business, Mark?
Just heads down, beginning of the year, aligning on milestones and, getting things going. We have some things coming up. Can't share too much about it, but how about yourself?
Well, I just started the process of getting the Inner Ally questionnaire automated. Right now it's in a Google form, but we're going to have it fully automated so that you can find out where you can begin to improve some of your own inner language and what inner allies you might need to help you. So I'm super excited about that.
Very nice. Yes. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Definitely check out Scott Shute's work, and we'll have some links there as well for you to check out. And check out Cynthia's work and my work as well if you're interested. And yes, looking forward to chatting again. And thank you all for joining us.
And we'll put all of Scott's links in the show notes so that you can get a hold of him. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.